Welcome to the Australian Institute of Insider Trade. Hi, I'm Boss Fisher, the founder and CEO. Today, I'm joined by Nicholas Eftimiades, a veteran intelligence expert and author of the newly released second edition of the Chinese Espionage Operations and Tactics. With decades of experience across US intelligence, defense, and academia, Nicholas offers unmatched insights into one of the most underestimated threats of our time. We dive into China's espionage engine, from mass recruitment and weaponized platforms like LinkedIn and TikTok to bold influence campaigns embedded in universities, research labs, and even agriculture. This conversation isn't about fear, it's about clarity and awareness. If you want to understand the scale, strategy, and boldness behind China's global espionage machine, you're in the right place. So let's get into it. Nicholas, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So before we dive into your book, which I very much enjoyed, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what got you into being so interested on Chinese espionage?
Well, I actually got my degrees in East Asian studies and did part of my undergraduate and graduate research in Taiwan and mainland China. And after that time, actually coming back from that experience, joined the CIA and spent 34 years of my life, well, initially in CIA, and then I went to the State Department as what we call a special agent or diplomatic security service, and then ultimately the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I spent the bulk of my career, all that time working on China and very often Chinese intelligence,
Yeah, yeah.
working against Chinese intelligence. So been a long career, retired in 2017 and became a professor of Homeland Security at Penn State University.
Great, excellent. So you've released this second edition. My question is, why? Why this book? What are you hoping to get? What are you trying to informing the audience, the readers, the global about your book and about the threat that's taking place?
Well, I actually wrote on this subject in the 1990s on Chinese intelligence operations, and it wound up with 4 congressional hearings in the United States. Wound up with over 100 Chinese intelligence officers being sent home worldwide, and me being declared in the Chinese press as an enemy of the people. So it was important at that time, and yet again now, to raise awareness and education. Actually, it's an
Yep,
education
yep.
campaign for not only, I mean, not the intelligence community, because they see this all the time internally, right? They know what's happening. It is for the policymakers. It is for companies. It's for just individuals who really have to have an understanding of what threat is, because what you find, whether it's Australia, the United States, or anyone else, government doesn't tell people,
That's
right?
true.
They circle the wagons, they hide their secrets and say, trust us, we know everything that's going on. Well, guess what? If you're a company and you're doing business in China and your intellectual property, your trade secrets are vulnerable, that's a huge deal for you. You really need to know what the threat level is, and
Correct.
so you can address it correctly. So that's really what I wrote the book for that, those businesses and those individuals outside actually of government circles, so that they can understand the threat that they're facing.
Cool, cool. So I want to get into the sort of core moral. What's the real strategic driver behind uh, China's Communist Party espionage model? Is it about the regime's survival? Is it about global dominance? Is it about ideological control, or all of the above?
Well, it's a big all the above, but it is. You're talking to Chinese. The first thing they'll tell you, and the first thing they'll tell you in China is, we have 5,000 years of history.
Yes,
Or
that's
as
yeah.
People's Liberation Army officer once told me, Nick, we've had wars that lasted longer than your country has been a country. Uh,
Okay.
Yeah. and in that time, what we find from the very beginning of the Qin dynasty all the way onward, is China has a very internal focus, right? It's very focused on threats to the regime. You could call them dynasties in previous days. Now it's the CCP, another dynasty.
Yep.
Uh, but they're very, very focused on what they perceive as threats to themselves. I'm always I note the fact that if you look at the period of around 1100 AD to 2000 or so, in that time period, Europe had about 1100 wars, every one of them externally. China had about the same number of wars, every one of them internally.
Very interesting.
So
Interesting.
they're very, and it wasn't until early 1600s, but really the 1800s, that they had that big association with the West. So they're very, very focused on internal security. Internal security is everything for them. And it does make up a strong component of their overseas espionage, diaspora communities,
Yep.
covert influence against other, not only diplomats, but foreign governments and companies, right? All this is really to protect the regime and to advance China's interests. So that's the way they strategically look at the world.
Okay. In your book, you mentioned the one of the key motives is for them to transfer information and wealth over from Western countries to China. On top of it, having control of its diaspora as well.
Right. So, and as it's been called, the greatest transfer of wealth in history.
Yeah,
Uh,
interesting.
so what we find is, unlike, and this is that whole difference in the intelligence mindset. In the West, basically, we grew up with this mindset of intel agency versus intel agency is focused on national security and policy issues, and that's what intel agencies have been very, very used to for decades, for more than half a century, since the through the Cold War. Not so in the case of China. The
Yeah.
focus has been, and we see this in cyber,
Yep.
a greater cyber threat capability than the rest of the world. And we see this in their actual insider threats directed against companies, the transfer of wealth, the transfer of knowledge and technology to China. So it is a huge focus of their intelligence activities.
Great, Nick. So you've given sort of a baseline of why they do it. Let me sort of now dig into the sort of operation model of what you term as whole of society model. What does it really mean in practice, and how does it change the way we should think about espionage threats today?
Well, it actually leverages Chinese society, and one of the examples that's sort of historic at this point that the FBI mentioned many decades ago was what they call a grain of sands approach.
Yeah, I was going to
China
mention that.
uses.
Yeah,
Right. And what they say is that, if Russians were stealing a pail of sand from a beach, they would send in a submarine at night. A bunch of commandos would emerge from the submarine. They'd paddle in and set up perimeter security, and one guy would come with a bucket of sand, and they would get back in the boat and paddle away, and then get in the sub and disappear below the waves. China would send 10,000 bathers the next day, and everyone would bring back a little bit of sand.
I know.
And
It's such a good metaphor. Such a good
right.
metaphor.
It really was. And how do you deal with 10,000 bathers?
Yeah.
Eating a little sand. They have what's known as plausible deniability. They're not doing anything, shady or illegal in that sense. And we see the same type of activities that China leverages its entire society. And the way it does this, it's extraordinary what the CCP does. They actually make it sort of in the interest of people to do this. They
Yeah.
reward them for doing it. So you have a host of people who go, in examples that we've seen, stealing solar panel technology,
Yeah.
stealing,
Yeah.
all types of technologies, and then having the Chinese government turn around and support those industries and subsidize those industries so that they can derail, their competitors in the West. So
Yeah. Yeah.
this is something our intel services, whether it's Australia, the Brits, the UK, France, they're not used to. They're
No, they're
used to
not.
playing spy versus spy, not
Correct.
this type of integrated societal approach.
Yeah. So that's another thing I wanted to touch base is this idea that any Chinese anywhere around the world can be asked to provide or collect or collaborate to get specific information to the CCP, for example. I think a lot of organizations don't really understand that.
Right. And and they can. And China's national intelligence law from 2017, and their implementing regulations of the same year, and their national security law in 2020, all make it mandatory that Chinese citizens comply, and
Yeah.
businesses that they comply. Right. Doesn't matter if you think you're a private business or just a
Yes.
private citizen. It's mandatory that you comply. So, truth be told, it's amazing how the West doesn't see this, because we actually have seen it before. We saw it in the old Soviet Union.
Yes. So,
You know,
so why do you think there is a lack of understanding, or is it just a lack of, we just don't have the resources, or we just it's not a priority?
well, there are a couple of things. I mean, I laugh about the fact that when I came out of the intelligence community, when I retired, 6 months or so later, my phone was ringing off the hook with people wanting me to come in and consult and train on Chinese intel. And I thought, yeah, I said to people, at first I thought God's a comedian, because it waits till after I retire before
Yes.
anyone's interested. But and as people it was the Soviet Union that was a big threat. And then after that, terrorism was a big threat for 20
Yes.
years.
Yes.
And there's a lot acting against seeing China as a threat, right? People are making money.
Correct.
Companies make fortune in China. Politicians were making money because companies were donating to politicians. So it's very difficult in the face of that to then turn around and say, well, you're making money here. You need to start to think about putting that on the back end because our national security is at stake. That becomes a conflict in society.
Yeah.
There's also, I call it ignorance, arrogance, and greed. Ignorance because we didn't know what the CCP was up to, or at least
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
in the policy ranks say they didn't understand what the CCP was up to. Arrogance because, at least on the part of the United States, they had this mentality that, oh, inside every Chinese person is a freedom-loving American dying to get out. And once they make money and taste freedom, they'll they'll
Yes.
they'll they'll
Correct.
push CCP towards democracy. No, didn't
No.
happen.
No. No. Obviously not.
Ignorance, arrogance, and the last is the greed component of it. So we
Yeah.
have had over decades, and I've seen this now for more than 30 years. I've been waging this battle, if you will. For over 30 years, we've had this argument in society. You can almost call it haves and have-nots. The people who are
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
money from this, and the citizens who may pay the price for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to sort of step into sort of the machinations of their espionage model. So, they've got Patrick's students and they could have state-backed hackers to tourists with commercial instruction. But how does China operationalize such a wide recruitment base? And I'd be interested to also get your idea, uh, how exposed are countries like Australia to these sort of recruitment efforts?
Yeah, unfortunately, any free and open society is very exposed to these types of recruitment
Yeah.
efforts.
Yeah.
And I actually am amazed by it sometimes. It's just extraordinary that I've seen people who are Chinese, ethnic Chinese, in a cybersecurity firm in London, casually or pulling me aside, telling me, the MSS came to my parents' house and asked, when's the next time I'm coming back? Was I home at and how did they know I was even in cybersecurity? I keep a very low profile and things. So, there's that work that goes on inside China to identify people. I will tell you that LinkedIn, social media is a huge component of that. The ability now to search through artificial intelligence is another gigantic, because you can take a look at a person on LinkedIn and just in regular marketing software and pull together all their contacts with an assessment of who's a closer contact and a less closer contact. And from an intelligence perspective, as a targeting tool, that's pretty fantastic.
Yeah. What does it say about their boldness, or is that just trying whether the right word called survival, like whether they just it's part of their innate to do it to because they need to gather information because their masters are calling it.
Well, that is the case. If you take a look, actually, I've seen a lot of emails going back and forth. And truth be told, those MSS officers at the provincial levels are under relentless pressure from their leadership for results.
Yeah.
It's why I contend that they cut corners all the time. and it leads to what we see as poor operational tradecraft.
Yeah.
That said, because they moved to online recruitments and even running assets, which is what we call them, running
Yep.
assets or agents online, it's a no risk factor for China. It
Yeah.
is absolutely no risk. It's not like a case officer is going to get grabbed and arrested, servicing a dead drop in Brisbane or something like that. That's not happening. They're doing things in country and online, which
Yeah.
protect them.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about universities, because universities are very open societies. How easy is it for them to recruit research people, scientists, and so forth for that?
Well, what China does, in fact, Purdue University, one of our universities, produced a study on Chinese students and their opinions of the United States. And what they found was that as the students were doing their undergraduate, their opinions stayed generally the same about
Yeah.
the US. Until they graduated. For those that stayed on in the US, a shocking rise in their opinions once they got out past the university, once they got out past the Chinese Scholars and Students Association and the controlled groups of people who were watching them
Yeah. Yeah.
and the party control. Once they were living on their own, they were shocked at the way society actually is. And what this shows us, it's one of the many, many examples of the control that the PRC executes over its scholars and students abroad. That's the fundamental problem.
Yeah.
So, so long as they have that, it's going to be pretty tough to break that control.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned in the book, and it was quite interesting from the statistics that around 50% of their enterprise are, I wouldn't say keen, but they're there to basically collect economic espionage and so forth like that. And I also would like to sort of gain an understanding about the MSS compared its businesses that do collection of information. I mean,
Yeah,
both have the same, I suppose, goal, but it would be interesting to see your point of view.
right. If you leave out cyber espionage,
Yep.
if you put that aside, what you find out is that the MSS is responsible for less than 10% of the economic espionage. Okay. And the vast majority of it is done by individuals or individual companies. My latest calculation was 58%.
Yeah.
I'll tell you how I get that too. I have a database now of 900 cases of Chinese espionage, economic espionage, illegal technology exports, and covert action, covert influence operations,
Yep.
diaspora operations. So when you're looking at 900 cases, this isn't picking off one or two cases.
I
Now you
know.
have real data to work with, and that's to be frank, one of the differences that that book highlights is that you're actually working on hundreds and hundreds of cases and looking at all the tradecraft that was in each type of case. So what you find in economic espionage is that the mass part of it is done by Chinese companies. And the reason the motivations are doing it is to further their business in China. About 30% of it, 25 to 30% is done by the state-owned enterprises. Okay. And those are the companies that are owned, which are 300,000 or so,
Yep.
the companies that are owned primarily by the Chinese government. And a very, very small percentage is actually done by the government as a whole. And this is also what I mean by a whole of society approach, right?
Yes. Yep.
Hundreds and hundreds of cases on this I have. The majority of it is done by companies or by state-owned enterprises with the support of the Chinese government.
Yeah. 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 I want to talk something which is, I think, has been a sort of a bugbear in so many different cases, which is their covert activity. Some would say, general, when you do covert, it's rare or elite. But China's covert tactics are embedded into, for example, solar panels, mobile apps like TikTok, including maybe Zoom, cameras, CCTV cameras, hotel rooms, which you mentioned quite a bit in your book. Is this strategic brilliance or just exploitation of a system that never imagined this kind of threat?
I don't know if it's certainly exploitation of
Yeah.
a system of systems, and China just sets into law and into rules to ensure that they continue have continual access to that and are able to exploit those systems as they're rolled out, right? So it's apps. And there are dozens of apps now that I've seen publications coming out, that apps which show that they've been reporting to China, back to the Chinese government taking user data. Zoom was a case. We had a criminal case against Zoom in 20 and 21 for actually giving undercover accounts to Ministry of Public Security officers and allowing them into discussions that happened that centered around the Tiananmen anniversaries. So they were actually, and Zoom had agreed to give China 1 million data on 1 million users, that were discussing China or engaging in, from Hong Kong and from the U.S. So, and other places as well, I'm sure. So, we see active participation with companies to support China, and they have no choice. And that's what people have to understand. Zoom, for example, when Zoom was just slow in replying to the Ministry of State Security, they hadn't said no. They were just slow in their reply. China shut them out. They shut off Zoom completely in mainland China for a month. Zoom had no idea what happened. And then they went to, the Ministry of Public Security finally said to them, you're not getting back on until we get an agreement from you.
Interesting.
So, yeah, so these are the types of things. TikTok faces this, and every business, every app that collects data, faces the same conditions.
Yeah, look at it. It's interesting to see where the latest AI engine when they came out was Deep Insight.
Deep,
Deep, yeah. How
yeah.
long? There was. I don't know if this was blown by media. Um, the greatest download app seen in the last 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, and I got the feeling that really no one really cared where it sort of originated from. Um, and then I look at massive enterprises like Huawei and their telephones or the mobile devices, and again a lot of the Western countries are sort of debating whether to have them or not to have them. There isn't a clear cut understanding of what the threat is.
Right. And what you hit upon is the central point of it all. Tell you a little story. There was a firm, I forgot the name of it now, sorry, in Kansas City, mid part of the United States. And what they figured out once was that, and they were trading in stocks. And to do that, they used AI. So, firm in the benevolent group or something like that in the United States, in Kansas City, they're trading stocks and using artificial intelligence to do it. And what one of their engineers figures out is that in the milliseconds it takes to receive a signal from Wall Street to benevolent group, whatever it was, and then to send that back, they lose hundreds of dollars because it's slow in them getting
Yep.
the information. Yeah, milliseconds, slow in providing it and getting it back. So they actually moved their headquarters to right near the World Trade Center, or what was the World Trade Center, across the river there, just so that they can compete, because they can't compete, being in the middle of Kansas. Now, when you start thinking of that from Huawei and what they could potentially do, it doesn't have it's listening in is the least of my concerns with something like that. That just starts an encryption war. Okay, we'll use this
Yeah.
encryption or that
Correct.
encryption, and then that's a thing that you can mitigate for the next couple of years easily until you get into quantum issues. But the ability to slow down a signal or to stop a signal can play with utilities, can allow China to capture the entire stock exchange. I mean, by slowing down signals that go everywhere except to their companies, they
Yes.
could theoretically capture everything. So, I mean, it's a pretty complex situation that you have. And when you start introducing stuff, which is basically like from Huawei, which has proven to be working for a hostile government, I mean, this is what our leadership is contending with,
Correct.
and most of the leadership isn't standing up to it. They're
No,
just
because
trying to avoid the issue.
correct. And this is the other challenge that you read in the news, especially in the last probably 12 months, is around critical infrastructure.
Right.
And the question then is how much does China control our own critical infrastructure? Do they have listening devices, are they able to shut down these critical infrastructure like utilities, energies, and so forth? Um, in Australia, we've developed a standard about it's called SOCI, SOCCI, which is the whole idea is about securing of these critical infrastructures and these standard level that water, gas, electricity, communication, transport, you would have those similar ones that they have to achieve a certain cybersecurity standard. But for example, insider threat is not one of those requirements for them to do anything about. And insider threat has so many different platforms. It's not just about a person doing something bad, but it could be as like those, solar panels. Having discovered there's a sensor there that can transmit, send information, and
Right.
so forth. I gather that it's not taken seriously at all.
It's not. The Internet of Things is the Wild West as far as surveillance goes. And I was on a task force for the Defense Department and the Biden administration when they came and shut it down. But that was the focus of it, because we have billions of items coming on internet
Yeah.
as part of the Internet of Things. Actuators, they're called, or
Yep.
sensor systems or robotics or something that
Yep.
exists in the internet. And right now the regulations on them globally are just non-existent,
Yeah.
right? So even if you're the Defense Department and you say, "Hey, we don't want these things on," well, they typically just don't turn them on, but they're still embedded in the systems.
Yeah, they
So,
are. Yeah,
light
indeed.
bulbs. I mean, we're even at the point where light bulbs are all hooked up to that. Your washing machine, your refrigerators. In the next 10 years, it'll just intensify like that.
Yeah.
What I think what this really shows, which is kind of an extraordinary look towards it, is that Australia, United States, the same thing. And this is the problem: is our reaction to these types of advances from China. I mean, China's penetrated our critical infrastructure by the thousands and thousands of companies. That's come out in the U.S., right? Again, even to the point where they say they can't remove all the Chinese penetrations, right? So, I mean, why do you penetrate someone else's critical infrastructure? You do that to shut it off
Correct.
if you need to, right? But the problem is that even as you build greater security walls and say, oh well, you have to meet this standard. Well, companies now have to meet X standard to do that. Who pays for this? Who gets to pay for the companies adding more and more into cybersecurity? The
Correct.
consumer pays,
Correct.
right? When a government does it, who pays? The taxpayer
Like,
pays.
correct.
China's not paying. They're
No,
just sitting behind the keyboard, assaulting away.
yes.
They're, and the cost differential, while China's is spending in millions, we're spending hundreds of millions to try and protect. So there's no incentive for China to stop.
Yes.
Every bit of advantage is in their, every bit of advantage is
Correct.
in their hands, right? So there is no, unless the governments start to change the way they're approaching the situation, unless they start to say, hey, look, you know what? Next time we catch a cyber attack like this, we're kicking you off the stock exchange. Period. We're kicking your state-owned enterprises off the stock exchange. We're gonna have every foreign dollar withdrawn from them, and we're kicking them off.
Yeah. Ramification. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. They
Yeah.
have to face some type of consequences for this. Otherwise, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that's
I,
where we are now.
yeah. I wanted to sidestep slightly about the balloon case that happened over the US. What's your take of it, of why it took so long for the US to decide to take it down?
Well, I think there were a lot of concerns, but I don't think there were concerns from the military's point of view. They said publicly, we're not losing anything, meaning that even as this was sitting over bases, they shut down emissions, right? So what an event like that, it could be doing a number of things, not the least of which is sitting over military bases, because you got to sit between the base and the satellite if you're going to
Yes.
get the communications line, right?
Correct.
You have to be right in the middle there. So they could have been collecting that. They could have been collecting long wave, that goes over a great distance, how we communicate with the ships. But what the military didn't consider is they also could be collecting against critical infrastructure.
Yes.
right? High intensity, high definition photos, and picking up emanations from the Lockheed Martin, and water facilities and things like that. So they could have been collecting and those civil components as well, which never came out. The military was very focused
Yeah.
on interests.
Yeah.
But it's a state of confusion at first. It took a while for everyone to figure out who was in charge.
Yes.
And then there was a risk. Do we want to bring this down on land? I understand that. If you bring it down on land, what are the potential risks with it? So, I mean, what I don't think is correct is that, of course, none of this was shared with the American people,
No.
right? What
Correct.
what happened? I mean, it was just because the people noticed it that it got any press play at all, that people found out about it,
I
but the
know.
government turned around and subsequently covered it up.
It did.
Whose interests were you voted in to protect? You're voted in to protect me, the citizen, the taxpayer, okay? You're voted in to tell me what was going on. You're not voted in to protect Beijing,
Correct.
right? Well,
Correct.
we're not going to discuss this and let it blow over. Excuse
Yeah.
me, my security is threatened. I kind of figure like I have a right to know about it.
Yes. Yes.
So this is,
Correct.
and unfortunately, it puts, when you lack leadership in a government, you try and hem and haw, and you try and find the easiest way out for partners.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the right things to do aren't the easiest.
Yeah. Moving on. So I wanted to touch on a sensitive subject called the Confucius Institute. That's sort of pitched as a cultural program. So what intelligence and functions do you think they are performing, and how do they fit into the China global influence of architecture?
Okay, well, for the Confucius Institutes, I would say they fit more into the influence architecture than they do the espionage architecture.
Yeah.
And you know, we've had one case out of Belgium where a guy with the director of the Confucius Institute was actually accused of espionage operations. Outside of that, there hasn't been one prosecution globally on that.
Yeah.
Uh, there's been a lot of manipulating, trying to manipulate universities, trying to manipulate elections or individuals, trying to change the status of discussion. No mention of Taiwan, no mention of Tibet. Trying to put forth basically Beijing's line on the world and how
Yeah.
the world is. So you can accuse them of that. Um, the fact that all their contracts with universities are kept in secret doesn't help the confidence level of anyone on the outside of that. Because globally these are secret agreements. Well, I think particularly in nations where the taxpayer is paying for universities, they're probably entitled to know what type of agreement you're making with a foreign government.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a component, one of many, many components, which, by the way, exists down at the grade school level, all the way up through the university level on what you might call a watered down version of patriotic education that the
Yeah.
Chinese like to.
Okay. Okay. A question, more of a high level thinking question that came to me yesterday. What if espionage is no longer about stealing secrets, but about shaping reality, controlling how societies think, vote, and trust? So, have we underestimated the psychological sort of front of modern espionage that maybe China is trying to push?
Yes. I mean, I would agree with that 100%. Covert action, as it's called, is part of the work of any intelligence
Yeah,
agency, and that runs everywhere from military operations to political operations, supporting candidates, supporting people in the press, degrading people in the press, all those types of things, right? And the United States is no stranger to that. Did it in the '60s a lot, with South American regimes, things like that. However, nobody understood or prepared for the onslaught that we've received out of China, the billions that they've spent in doing this
yeah,
in multiple channels globally. It's not just directed against, Five Eyes. It's not just directed against, those premier states. It's directed globally. And I mean, it goes everywhere from Nepal to countries in Africa to,
yeah,
China is just extraordinary in how they allocate their money and turn their whole system into this advocacy campaign overtly and covertly.
Yeah, and so taking to that next channel, I just wanted to see your take of the recent story about Facebook. Should I mention that a recent whistleblower report suggested Facebook, under Mark Zuckerberg's leadership, was actively cooperating with the Chinese interests, even helping them suppress content of, of critical about CCP. Um, what is your take about that story, if you came across it?
Well, yeah, there's also Facebook, which is taking now hundreds and hundreds of sites that were put up, by China, dissident sites actually that China put up that would lead to another web page that would download viruses into the computers of individuals, so surveillance viruses and such. So I don't know because I don't know the answers, the true answers. I
Yeah.
know what the whistleblower said. But we've seen Facebook and even things like YouTube. YouTube is undergone, I don't think they know it yet, but they're undergoing investigation for suppressing content on behalf of the CCP. So that's going to be a big issue coming up in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
Which maybe I
Um,
shouldn't say that, but no, but they unexplained how people can lose tens of thousands of followers, who are basically anti-CCP sites.
yeah.
Just, you wake up next day and you have 100,000 followers less. So there's a lot of questions that really have to be answered.
Oh, for sure. I want to take the espionage to another level. So I think it was only about a month ago, maybe a little bit more. Two Chinese nationals were caught trying to smuggle a high contagious corn pathogen into the US.
Right.
From what I gather, had the pathogen been released into American agriculture, it could have caused massive economic and ecological damage. Isn't that an act of aggression? I believe even a form of biological warfare. I was
Well,
amazed.
it is a form of biological warfare. It certainly is. The individuals involved actually lied to the principal investigator at University of Michigan as to what they actually had, the type of
Correct.
pathogen that they're using. I actually looked up in my database. There are at least half a dozen other cases with University of Michigan that,
Oh, wow.
yeah, espionage activities from drone. Just one of those cases had 5 Chinese nationals who were collecting against military sites and such. So it's no stranger to there. But yeah, I think you see this. You also saw a similar case out of Canada, in Winnipeg, and I think it's just an arrogance. It's a lack of any idea of following the law. I don't know
Totally.
if it was, yeah, I mean, clearly, but that to be frank, in many ways, that's sort of Chinese, because the law is not, you know, the law is something that you can use against people, but it's not something that anyone takes seriously. So
Yeah.
people,
Yeah. What's amazing
it's a
me is there's no ramifications to it. I mean,
right.
to me, that's like you could consider this as an act of war. You're trying to destroy a whole entire agriculture.
Right, and the interesting parts is that that University of Michigan has no agriculture program, so that's a question that
Interesting.
needs to be answered as to exactly why they had this pathogen that they were using, and what their intent was. This all comes down to intent. What was their intent in bringing it
Yes.
in and using it? And I'm
Yeah.
sure that's where the federal investigation is focusing on. What was their actually intent in doing it? It's
Yeah. Mm.
but stuff like that you find is just a complete disregard to law and to doing whatever they want is sort of very Confucian as well. It's a humanistic society, not a legalistic society. So
Very true.
you know,
Very true.
and we're a legalistic society, very much so in the U.S.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we need to answer a lot more questions about who they were and what their intent was, and what the CCP knew about it beforehand, and what was the overall goal. Why are you studying something in University of Michigan, which has no agriculture program? There's an interesting point. So
Yeah, but it's very easy to deflect sorry, the CCP can easily deflect and say, well, we had no knowledge, we're not involved, and so forth. And that seems to be the common thing. Their proclamation that they never do any form of espionage. Um, it's very easy to say, we're not at fault, and yet they
Yeah.
still do that.
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
which
So
is
my next
why,
question, yeah, my next question is, how are Western legal and political systems designed for such openness, and just are they equipped to confront such a threat that
no,
sort of
and
expose those
that's the problem.
principles?
Fundamentally, they're not. They don't know how to address it. Our intelligence, our security apparatus, our law enforcement, our intelligence, and our legal system is not designed for this type of threat. Right? We're designed for a very clear threat that we can codify, we can put into law, we can say 1, 2, 3 threat. But in an open society where you encourage people to talk and you encourage people to make their views known to their political leadership, where you want that engagement, you want that type of engagement from the citizens into a political, you have no way of weeding out them political warfare that's waged against you.
Yeah,
And China happens to be a very expert in this field.
yeah. A side question regarding Chinese students. I see that obviously the US is now clamping down on getting Chinese students. Maybe in Australia too. Is there a sort of a balance in terms of getting students, but also in a form of vigilance, striking a balance in between? Is there such a thing?
There is, and we should do a better job at that. And we don't. We, when you're applying for U.S. visa, question 26 on the visa application asks you, are you coming to the U.S. to spy, to commit sabotage, or to steal technology? Um, I mean, it literally says that. So I think we need to be a little clearer with those people who apply and say, look, this is the United States. These are the things you can't do, and this is why. This is our society, and the discussions you'll hear and the arguments that you'll hear, because we live in a democracy and everybody fights about what they believe is right or wrong at national and at state levels. I think we could do a better job explaining to people incoming, instead of them just leaving them off to the CCP propaganda apparatus, which
Yeah,
is telling them, so we need to engage those students who do come here
yeah,
more. Um,
yeah.
in the summer, I'll just say in the summer of 2020, I guess it was, we apprehended 4 PLA officers, People's Liberation Army officers, who had lied on their visas, saying they had no association with the military and were doing graduate work, PhD work in the United States. We grabbed them, and ultimately we let them go, for in exchange for diplomatic concessions, or meetings on their part. Not a good change, but what didn't go to the press is that after we grabbed those 4 individuals over the summer, over 1,000 students left, 1,000 PLA students left, right?
That's
They
interesting.
they said, "Uh-oh, let's get out of here," and they left the United States. So there were 1,000 literally that fled, based on those actions. So
Interesting.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's pretty pervasive.
Yeah, from the looks of it. Which leads me to the next question. So, in the line between sort of espionage, influence, and investment, they sort of keep on blurring. I'm sort of a little curious how democracies should adapt without becoming the very thing they fear. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
suppose the question is, what do we do? Or what should democracies do?
Well, I, I think a couple of things are really important. Number one is partnerships. I mean,
Okay,
between let's just start with the Five Eyes, right? U.S., Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and I think that's it. 5, yeah. We have to be committed to, if a person is caught for stealing technology in the U.S. or in Canada, they don't come to any of our countries. They don't publish their papers here. They don't get on board a flight anywhere. Same rules that we have for terrorism.
correct, correct.
We need to approach this as a uniform group. And, really, we're just trying to push China into accepting norms. global norms, behaving in a fashion that's, that addresses global norms. And we're not going to do that. No one's powerful enough to do that by themselves,
Correct.
right? We really have to work together and say, look, these are our norms, what we expect of society. There's cutthroat competitions between companies, but we expect everyone not to be stealing intellectual property. We expect people not to be hacking, doing cyber attacks against others. So we need to hold China to those same standards. Number one, we need to understand that we have to do this in a partnership. Number two, we need a strategy. I look at senior U.S. political figures, and I say, where do you want us to be with China in 10 years from now, or 15 years?
Yeah, exactly.
And you'd be looking at it at, well, our expression is a deer in the headlights. So no one's thought about this. Well,
Yeah,
you need to think where that relationship is, and let's get a strategy we can all work on to guide China into a course of behavior that's acceptable globally.
yeah. Which then leads me to the next question. So if China sort of sees a wide range of people as sort of like employees or suppliers, researchers as potential assets, how should we rethink insider threat in the West?
How should we respond?
Rethink. Yeah, or yeah, that too. Yep.
Yeah, well, here's one thing we can't do, which is give up our values, right? We're still going to be open democracies, and we have to not get pushed into a point where being draconian in response. Part of this is our ability to reach out to those groups. As I said, sort of in the visa questions,
Yeah.
you don't want to get involved with this, folks. Don't do anything like this, because we take it very seriously here in our country.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of present that, so they're going back to their own CCP apparatus, saying, look, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble if I do this in Australia or the US.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't want to take a risk. So we have to bring consequences to them so that they understand that
Interesting.
at a very
Yeah.
at an absolute minimum.
Yeah. Um, where do you see espionage moving in the next 5 years, specifically around China? What new fronts do you think they will open up?
Well, I think I would tell you that, the Brits reported something like 20,000 approaches and actual cases from Chinese intelligence on LinkedIn. Okay. The French reported 9,000, the Germans reported 10,000.
Yeah, amazing
I
numbers.
will bet, yeah, amazing numbers. And US isn't reporting, but I can only imagine what it is here. I will tell you, in the next 5 to 10 years, all that will be through AI. You won't even have a person in the loop. You'll have the
Interesting. Yes.
approaches made through LinkedIn. You'll have the money moved through other online platforms. You'll have the tasking done. Everything will be done completely without a person in the loop. So, which espionage is very personal business, right? You got to get a person to trust you, that you're going to take
Interesting.
care of them and not
Yes.
risk their life and
Yeah.
things like that. And but they'll build that into artificial intelligence. So
Yeah.
it'll be a complete, and then we won't have cases in the tens of thousands. We'll have them in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. Interesting. So it'll be like an AI versus AI because
Yeah.
you know, we will use
Yeah.
AI to protect ourselves, but they will, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
we're coming to the end of our discussion. Nick, I just want to ask you a question. Is there a question that I should have asked you, but I haven't asked you yet? Is there something that you want to relate to the viewers that um, makes them stand up and say, "Oh, I didn't realize that."
Yeah, I think you look, I I tell police groups this, right? Because they actually face the threat with the Chinese diaspora.
Yeah,
So, and I say, it doesn't matter what you think, is important or not important. It doesn't matter, because it's coming your way. I mean, it's period. And you can either decide to do something about it, or leave it to the next generation of law enforcement or security officers or insider threat specialists or CEOs and C-suite executives. You can just say, I'll leave it to them to handle it, but it is coming. It's
yeah,
it's here. China's already made that very, very clear. I mean, you have to be a person living under a rock not to see what's going on globally in this.
yes, that's
I,
true.
I mean, we've had over 24 arrests of Chinese worldwide in 2025 alone. right? Today, as we're filming this, two Air Force officers in Taiwan were arrested for espionage for China. We've had at least half a dozen arrested in economic espionage in the last month. So it's massive, it's global, it's not stopping. So the
Yeah.
only question is, your standard of living and what whether your businesses will thrive and how they'll thrive in this type of world, whether we have the will to marshal ourselves to be able to respond to this.
Yeah. Last but not least, then, Nick, how do people grab hold of your book? I mean, I very much enjoyed reading. It was very illuminating. So, how can viewers get the book? And if they wanted to, how would they reach you? Is there a way?
There is. The book is available through Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and in fact, I have a website which is Shinobi Enterprises.
Okay.
Um, Shinobi is the ancient Japanese word for ninja. Actually, a ninja didn't come about until 1950s.
Yes.
So Shinobi Enterprises, and they can go there. Also, I have posted there interviews. I have posted lectures. I have posted papers that I've done in academic journals, all free. So if a person wants to really spin up on this subject and really wants to understand it, that's the library for you.
Okay,
Um,
great. So what we'll do is when we'll publish the video, we'll actually create some links to
right.
Shinobi.
Hmm.
And I encourage people, those who are in the risk security operation side, to actually check it out because it's such useful information. I mean, for me to be able to get ready for this interview, I mean, not only did I read the book, I also watched quite a few of your videos that are circulating around. So I very much enjoyed that. So Nick, look, again, pleasure. I very much enjoyed your discussion and what you had to say. As again, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity and the time that you are sharing with us. And hopefully, this message about being better prepared or understanding that it's coming uh, is important.
Yeah, it's important that the word get out.
Yeah. Nick, thank you again, and I hope to chat with you soon or meet with you soon.
Yes, thank you very much for having me, and I would look forward to that.
Okay, thank you.